Hi, everybody. I'd like to thank you guys at the Human Relief Organization on letting me come in and speak to you about some of the biological and health hazards that we face in today's world. Um, so, just a little bit about myself is that I've been with the fire department here for 15 years, currently serve as the EMS lieutenant, and I have been a member of the um, was a member of the Ebola risk team, as well as one of the liaisons with the local hospital about this. So, a little bit of history is that we've started with the Ebola task force or the Ebola group, and then we've actually decided to make it into an all hazard biologic kind of approach, as there are multiple biologic hazards that can affect you, not just Ebola. So, let's start with what is a biological hazard? Biological hazard is derived from live pathogens or the product of living things that cause or are related to disease and death in plants, animals, and humans. So pretty much it's anything that's pretty much alive can become a biological hazard. Um, some of the more common ones that we see on a daily basis is we have the bacteria, viruses, right? So common colds, flu seasons, things like that, plant and animal irritants, pollutants, and toxins. Some of the easiest ways that have been noted for to prevent biological and health hazards is hand washing, right? Very simple process. Just make sure that after, every patient contact that we have, we wash our hands. Before you eat, you wash your hands. After you use the restroom, you wash your hands. If your hands get dirty, you typically need to wash your hands. That way, what you eat, the pollutants, the toxins, all that stuff, bacteria doesn't get onto the food that you're trying to eat. Then you ingest it, and then it's inside your system. We've also got complex vaccines now, right? We get sick, we go to the doctor, we get a shot. Every year we go and we get a flu shot. These are some ways that we use to prevent the spread of um, any of these biological hazards, as well as just stay healthy. Some of the ways that we can use prevention is just basic medical treatment. Protective clothing is another way. So for some people who work at um, labs and stuff, they have to wear certain suits, certain respirators, things like that. That way they don't actually come in contact with it, as well as environmental filtering, right? We filter the air, we filter the water. Our water is filtered. That way it takes out the toxins, it takes out any of the biological issues that we might have, which we'll talk about that a little bit later. Epidemics. What is an epidemic? Epidemics are pretty much illnesses that are caused by a single pathogen source that affect a population at a rate that rises faster than the disease that can be controlled. Another definition is pretty much what an outbreak is. The small number of people can constitute an epidemic, in which case it's called an outbreak. Pretty much it's a localized kind of rapid growth of the biologic of the epidemic in a smaller area. They consider that to be an outbreak. And then epidemics are typically defined by their geographical region. If it involves the entire globe, it becomes what's called a pandemic. So there's that little difference between epidemic and a pandemic. So the difference between an epidemic and a pandemic is also an epidemic is an event in which a disease is actively spreading and is often used to describe the problem that has grown out of control. So Ebola for some initially was, just an epidemic, and then it kind of spread once people started traveling. A pandemic refers to the geographic spread. It also describes the disease that affects a whole country or the entire world. So some recent epidemics and pandemics, just to be named, are the AIDS pandemic, H1N1, commonly called the swine flu, Ebola, SARS, severe acute respiratory syndrome, and then the H5N1, which is the aviation flu. So some of the recent top U.S. epidemics that we'll go through, so it's more like the top 15 that have gone through the history of epidemics in the U.S. is from 1633 to 1634, we had the smallpox from the European settlers. That was contained in Boston. 844 of the 5,889 Bostonians who had the smallpox ended up dying from it. Next one up is in 1793, we had the yellow fever from the Caribbean. This was pretty much isolated to Philadelphia. It incurred about 5,000 deaths, and over 17,000 people actually fled from the city of Philadelphia during this. Vaccine for yellow fever was developed in 1953. However, there is no known cure for the disease, but usually one vaccination will keep you healthy. You don't need to keep going them. In 1832 to 1866, there was a couple outbreaks of cholera that struck New York City, and it was estimated 2 out of every 6 Americans died during that outbreak in New York City. 1858, scarlet fever also came in waves that pretty much hit the New England region of the United States. There was no vaccine, but it's believed to be that improved hygiene is believed to have lessened the impact to that. So back to that hand washing kind of stuff going on there. Washing utensils, washing plates, things like that nature after people were sick. 1906, 1907, we had the Typhoid Mary outbreak. That was also in New York. It's reported that about 10,771 people died annually from that epidemic. 1918, the Spanish flu hit the United States. There was over 675,000 deaths from that. Then 1921 to 1925, diphtheria epidemic hit the United States, which is about 15,520 people died during the peak of this. 1916 to 1955 was the peak of polio in the United States. About 3,145 people died during the peak, and the peak is considered to be 1952 for the U.S. In 1981 to 1991, second measles outbreak. Annual death rate was between 2,000 and 10,000 people a year. 1993, there was contaminated water in Milwaukee. Over 400,000 people were infected with nearly 100 deaths. So once again, we talk about filtering the water. In 2010 to 2014, whooping cough hit California, and of this, there was 10,000 cases and 10 infants died during this. And then obviously, the 1980s and now, we have the HIV and the AIDS, an AIDS pandemic, and that's about 1.2 million are considered to be affected currently. So some of the big things with knowing that an epidemic is coming and working with an epidemic and managing it is that not only does public health is involved, but you also have to work with other agencies like emergency management, hospital coalitions, hospital groups, different states, different countries. It just becomes a whole lot of networking in order to get this under control. So some of the issues that we have is which actually recognizing an epidemic, right? The ability to locate victims and actually backtrack their actions to see maybe where they traveled from, what they were doing that caused this, if they came into a contact with the same kind of pathogen. So obviously some of that can be a little bit tricky because you talk about people going to different hospitals, people going to different states, people in different parts of the country, trying to trace them back together. So that can be a little bit of a hassle on trying to track down what recognizing the epidemic initially. But then obviously once you decide that there's an epidemic and the people are sick or infected, is trying to locate the existing and available medical treatment options for these patients. Do you put them all in one area? Are they spread out? Are they able to be transferred? Can we treat them? Can we not treat them? Do we quarantine them? Do we have a whole hospital wing that's quarantined? Or do we just use a whole hospital and put these people in it? Those are some things that need to be considered and worked out. As well as the mechanism to control the spread of disease, right? So we talk about the quarantining them, not coming in contact with them. Maybe we have to wear increased PPE around these patients. We have to wear like level A suits. How the disease is spread, whether it's spread through airborne, food, different natures, different things like that, as well as then also we need to take time to educate the public about what the disease is, how it's spread, how to contain the disease, and how to spot some people that they think they might actually have the disease. If not, it's going to be widespread chaos and panic, and that's never results in anything worthwhile or good. And then obviously for us, it's the short-term and long-term disease prevention. Come up with some goals about managing it short-term, and then the long-term goal is how to treat these patients, how to treat the pathogen, how to decide on eradicating, if possible, the disease. And then so now we go on from pathogens to pretty much insects and animals can also transmit diseases. So you actually have what's called a zoonotic disease, which is the ability of a disease to cross over from an animal to a human host. Another issue in the biological world is, and health hazard world, is what's called a colony collapse disorder. It's a current one we have is really a situation where honeybee populations suddenly disappeared and resulted in predictions of global food shortages of over about $200 billion in food crops. So obviously, if the honeybees aren't around to pollinate the food doesn't grow. Not only can it affect the insects and the animals, but eventually $200 billion loss in food crops is going to affect our population in the world as well. And then we also have plant epidemics. Plant epidemics are pretty much caused by climate change is the number one reason. And some of the issues in the climate change can be rainfall, temperature changes, right? Talk about global warming. There you go with that. Rainfall, droughts, monsoons, things like that. Excessive rain, not enough rain, sunlight. If you're in an area that requires a lot of sunlight and all of a sudden you start building factories around, you start getting some smog, you're not going to have your sunlight around. The humidity changes, and wind. So some recent and plant epidemics is the Irish potato famine that took place from 1845 to 1850. That resulted in the starvation of 1 million people and the immigration of another 1.5 million people. So obviously, not only does it affect Ireland without having the potatoes, but now you have about 1.5 million people emigrating, leaving Ireland, going to other countries. So how do those countries plan for that? Then there was also in 1942 the Bengal rice epidemic, Southeast Asia, that resulted in approximately about 2 million deaths. And then in 1970 we had the corn epidemic. Really didn't have any loss of life with the corn epidemic, but it was thought to have resulted in about $1 billion in revenue losses in crops. So these epidemics and pandemics not only can result in loss of life, but they can also result in loss of economic function